In a world with holographic waifus and professors reviving woolly mammoths, we tend to take science for granted. In Dr. Stone, the conflict between Senku and Tsukasa reminds us just how vital science is to our civilization. While Tsukasa works to gain power in order to prevent the return of civilization, Senku works to restore scientific progress and everything that comes with it. But this conflict begs the question, why bother in the first place? Almost all of the first half of Dr. Stone follows Senku's efforts to stop Tsukasa, so one could argue that the show would move along a lot quicker without him. And quite honestly, this is a perfectly valid argument. Without the threat of Tsukasa, Senku would have more time to focus on building the Kingdom of Science. So then why dedicate so much time to exploring Tsukasa and his philosophy? Why not save everyone the time and trouble and have Taiju stop the lions instead of Tsukasa? In short, Tsukasa plays a critical role in developing the underlying theme of the entire series. The conflict between Senku and Tsukasa is one that is tragically overlooked and often described in political terms, but is ultimately a response to the tragedy of human existence. In Tsukasa's perspective, humanity is better off in its primitive stage, avoiding civilization's unwanted externalities. But is mankind truly better off by preventing scientific progress? Before I continue, this video contains major manga spoilers, so do not watch if you are not caught up. If you enjoyed this discussion, make sure to subscribe for more content like this. With that out of the way, let's discuss the Tsukasa Empire and its impact on the narrative of Dr. Stone. Tsukasa's introduction into Dr. Stone is one reason why the series has such a strong start. Tsukasa shocks fans when he effortlessly defeats a pack of lions, but then curiously takes the time to butcher the remaining lion. When Taiju acts surprised, Tsukasa admits that he personally killed the lion and must give thanks by using every piece of it. Already we can see how Tsukasa is capable of incredible acts of both violence and compassion. This ambiguous spectrum leaves fans wondering what Tsukasa's motives are until he speaks with Senku about the disparities of civilization. Specifically, Tsukasa argues that the modern world was ruined by the older generations and their greed, and so he and Senku should kill the adults in order to prevent the return of civilization's corruption. Right away, Tsukasa demonstrates his resentment for the modern world. From what he says to Senku, it appears that Tsukasa resents older generations for controlling younger generations with money and greed. However, this is only partly true. Tsukasa often claims that the problem with the modern world was that the older generations used money to take control of everything. To prevent their return, Tsukasa builds an empire consisting only of youths he views as necessary to his cause. Through his words and actions, it seems that Tsukasa is opposed to reviving the old and greedy, but this is only the surface. Likewise, while he is opposed to Senku advancing science, Tsukasa does not resent science at its core. The truth is that Tsukasa wants to prevent all the externalities that would return with civilization. We learn later in the story that Tsukasa trained to fight in order to pay for his sister Mirai's life support bills. Before this, he explains how an adult beat him for taking seashells from the beach the adult owned. His sister's illness and the greed of adults led Tsukasa to believe that the only way not to suffer was to gain power. And this is exactly what he did as he became the strongest primate high schooler. So what we can see is that Tsukasa does not actually hate money or adults, but rather the discrimination that comes along with greedy adults. In his perspective, civilization should not be completely revived because it will give birth to the greed of the modern world. In other words, only those who have not yet been indoctrinated by the greed of the modern world should be brought back. Hence Tsukasa's focus on reviving youths. This also makes sense when you consider that science is not completely outlawed in Tsukasa's empire. In his first meeting with Chrome, Tsukasa admits that his empire uses fire and tools. Again, Tsukasa does not take issue with civilization necessarily, but more so with the greed and corruption that come along with its progress. For this reason, the conflict with Senku is often perceived as a political one. Tsukasa's philosophy is almost identical to that of Jean-Jacques Rousseau, a famous contributor to social contract theory. In essence, Rousseau argued that man was a noble savage in his primal stage. but was later locked in chains as civilization brought about modernity. As industry grew, money and resources began to concentrate in the hands of the noble families. As a remedy, Rousseau argued that the people needed to come together and form their own sovereign power to prevent further discrimination. This philosophy evolved over time, as seen by Karl Marx, who argued that the workers must start a revolution against the capitalists. Unfortunately, Marx's philosophy was abused by dictators, who led revolts against the capitalists in order to build positions of power for themselves. This warped version of Rousseau and Marx is demonstrated by Tsukasa, who believes purging adults will prevent the return of capitalist discrimination. What separates Tsukasa from figures like Stalin and Castro, however, is his perception of human life as inherently valuable. While dictators kill without thought, Tsukasa kills only because he believes he is doing so for the good of mankind. The only reason Tsukasa kills is because he truly thinks that the only way to stop corruption is by doing so with force. But Tsukasa only kills when he sees it as absolutely necessary. After fighting Hyuga, Tsukasa reveals that he remembers every single statue he smashed well enough to recite them all. Clearly, Tsukasa values even their lives. What this means is that Tsukasa does not hate science, or civilization, or even the people who benefit from them. Tsukasa's only wish is to prevent greed and the discrimination it causes. And this is where the true conflict lies. Not in politics, but in human nature. While some might label Senku as a right-wing minded person in contrast to Tsukasa, this ignores an essential element of Senku's character. The truth is that Senku couldn't care less about politics. For example, after the defeat of Hyuga, Senku says that there can be a trial, but that he doesn't really care because he's a scientist. This statement alone teaches us two important things about Senku. First, his indifference towards a trial demonstrates that Senku has no personal interest in retributive justice. Second, the fact that he distinguished himself as a scientist shows that Senku's interest is in scientific progress, not the progress of law or justice. This means that Senku, unlike Tsukasa, claims to act according to his own desires rather than the good of society. In other words, Senku has no political motives because he has no interest in society other than protecting the lives of others. While Tsukasa claims to be acting in favor of society, Senku often gives the impression that he is a sleazy opportunist. While we know that Senku is actually a good person, this impression is actually an important element to Senku's character. For example, when Gen proposes the plan to trick Tsukasa's army, he says that God might send them to hell for their actions. In response, Senku says God has been absent from science for the last 10 billion years. Here, as Gen suggests that his plan might be unethical, Senku responds by claiming that science doesn't care about right and wrong. This shows that Senku does not see himself as a hero or a prophet. Rather, Senku just wants to save humanity by doing what he loves, exploring science. Whether it's Suika's vision, Ruri's sickness, or Gen's cola, Senku helps others as he carries out his own scientific projects, not through self-proclaimed noble sacrifices. And this is where the true contrast lies between the Kingdom of Science and the Tsukasa Empire. In the Kingdom of Science, desires are encouraged so that personal skills may be improved and used for others. Chrome's interest in science helps Senku's projects, Kaseki's interest in crafts helps provide engineering and technology, Suika's desire to be helpful leads her to become the group detective, etc. So in the Kingdom of Science, personal desires are encouraged because they lead to specialized talents. But this is far from true in the Tsukasa Empire. Tsukasa selects talented individuals for his cause, but on the condition that they serve the greater good. Tsukasa believes that selfish desires, when unrestrained, will bring back the corruption of the modern world. So while Senku encourages personal desires, Tsukasa restrains them. The real question fans are asked isn't whether or not civilization is inherently good or bad. Instead, the question asked is this: what is the nature of human desire? If desire is inherently good, then naturally it should be encouraged. If desire is inherently bad, then it should be discouraged and restrained. Obviously, Senku sees desire as inherently good because he acts in his own interests and inspires others to do the same. In contrast, Tsukasa believes that encouraging desires will only lead to discrimination caused by unchecked greed. What then is the answer? Well, despite the black and white picture I just painted, the answer is much more profound. Ironically, the first person Senku revives after freezing Tsukasa is someone Tsukasa would have despised. In need of a top-tier captain, Minami takes Senku to the Nanami conglomerate. Hoping to avoid him entirely, Minami is forced to reveal the identity of Ryusui. She explains that, although he is the best captain they'll find, he is also a hedonist with a vile personality. While the others consider their options, Senku immediately revives him and explains that skill is the most important in the end. As if on cue, Ryusui declares the world for his own immediately upon revival. When he learns of Senku's plan for sailing, he demands oil, demands all rights to the oil, and institutes a paper currency into the Kingdom of Science. Only alive for a short time, Ryusui manages to bring about everything Tsukasa wanted to prevent. Obviously, this wouldn't have worked with the Tsukasa Empire still running. Greedy and self-indulgent, Ryusui is everything Tsukasa hated about the modern world and its corruption. At least, that's how he seems at first. Later, Senku revives Ryusui's butler, Francois. Unlike the boisterous Ryusui, Francois possesses a great deal of etiquette and composure. The refined Francois later shows that they're incredibly loyal to Ryusui. This raises an important question. Why does Francois, someone perfectly disciplined, serve a hedonist like Ryusui? Francois makes this clear when they explain that Ryusui does not seek to own everything for himself, but rather to own the joy that he brings to others. This is made clear in a flashback when Ryusui's father scolds him for his self-indulgent lifestyle. When the father is ignored, he asks Francois to share their thoughts about his son. Francois responds with the following: "It is far easier to give up before getting hurt." Master Ryusui does not deceive himself in this way. He proclaims his desires loudly and perseveres. Debauchery is the last word I would use to describe such fortitude, because desire is noble. Here, Francois demonstrates that pursuing one's desires is a noble pursuit for two reasons. First, because to pursue one's desires means to be true with oneself. Second, because pursuing one's desire requires time and effort before it can be fulfilled. In other words, desires are noble because they show us who we are now and guide us to who we want to become. This statement couldn't be more true for each person in the story. Kohaku wanted to protect her sister Ruri, so she trained every day by bringing her hot spring water. Byakuya wanted to be an astronaut, so he trained for years until he finally made it to space. Even Tsukasa, who wanted to help his sister as best he could, fought and became a monster in order to pay her hospital bills. With each individual, their desire reflects their honest character and shows the trajectory for who they'd like to become. The value in desire is even clearer in Senku's projects. With each project, Senku identifies a clear goal and follows a roadmap for how to achieve it. The project is rarely easy to complete, but the longest projects provide the most value to the Kingdom of Science. But, as Tsukasa clearly points out, it is still possible to follow one's desire and be far from noble. So what is the answer to the dilemma between Senku and Tsukasa? Simply put, the answer is to stick to what you love. As Senku has said many times, his only interest is in science. To fulfill his childhood goal of reaching space, he studied and worked hard in order to do so. Along the way, he met Taiju and Yuzuriha and realized the importance of friendship. This demonstrates the truth in Francois' testimony. All of us have desires. If we want to pursue our desire, we may only do so by being truthful about what we want, and then putting in the time and effort to do so. This second element is crucial to preventing the corruption that Tsukasa fears. When we work hard and train towards our goals, we teach ourselves the value of discipline at the same time. With Senku, this discipline means trying an experiment 1,000 times before getting the desired result. With Tsukasa, this means fighting for his entire life just to keep his sister alive. And this is why Senku and Tsukasa seem so different, yet so much like best friends. They both understand the value in pursuing one's desires. They are both able to recognize talented and disciplined individuals. The only difference between the two is how they react to the stone world. Tsukasa, though disciplined, sees an opportunity to stop corruption before it comes back, and aims to create a utopia. Senku, however, knows that the stone world is no different from the modern world. He knows that people still have the same desires they had 3,700 years ago, even if they changed a little bit. And this is why the Kingdom of Science beats the Tsukasa Empire. There are no shortcuts in life. There are only those who live in bad faith, and those who do what they love until they die. I hope you enjoyed this discussion. If you enjoyed the video, make sure to give it a thumbs up. If you'd like more content like this, make sure to comment with your thoughts and subscribe to the channel. Thank you for watching, and I hope to hear from you soon.